You've just landed in the music landing zone. Today, I am talking about the 1981 classic Masayoshi Takanaka solo album, Alone. Now, if you could please like, share, subscribe. I'm trying to reach the Takanaka community. I'm trying to reach the jazz fusion community. I'm trying to really reach the music community in general. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And let's get right into it. If you don't know, Masayoshi Takanaka is a legendary Japanese guitarist primarily, but he's also a multi-instrumentalist, bassist. He does keyboards on some stuff. He can do it all almost. Just legend. Has really exploded in the rest of the world in the past 5-10 years due to his iconic album art in large part, but also because of his fantastic music. Now, this album, in terms of its sound, I always like to compare it to some of his other stuff. So if you're following along, because I'm doing a whole series on Takanaka, I have reviews for every one of his solo albums up to this point. You can go and check those out later. Thank you so much for that as well. This album compared to his last couple. So, Takanaka is very famous for this beachy jazz fusion vibe. A little bit of Brazilian music influence as well. On Alone, it's an interesting progression, I'd say. This album feels very summertime still. That beach vibe is not really present quite as much on this album. It's interesting because that was the case with the previous album, the Rainbow Goblins, as well. But this does go back to being a bit more of a summer vibe, but not quite so much that beachy vibe I get. I almost see with this album a picnic, kind of like hanging out with your friends or something. I don't know, like it's got this chill vibe, this album. I'd say that this is maybe the most chill Takanaka album thus far. It's not really all that blazing fast. Even the more exciting tracks, in terms of being upbeat and a bit more energy, are mid-tempo technically on this album. So that's interesting. If you are a fan of the more laid-back side of Masayoshi Takanaka, I'd say that this album is definitely one you should throw on. It would be perfect, you're lounging somewhere, I don't know, you're sitting outside soaking in the sun, and you just want some chill tunes. Generally speaking, this will be a pretty good album to throw on. It does have the first two tracks are kind of have some disco infused in there, because that's the other thing. I'd say that this album has less of a beach vibe. He's thrown in this disco kind of thing that's going on here a little bit. And he's also kept some of the cinematic elements, the strings and orchestrated bits from the Rainbow Goblins a little bit. So you mash all that together. You have a summery, cinematic, relaxing, chill kind of vibe on this album. If that sounds like it's for you, definitely check this one out. Can't go wrong with it. So, like all of Takanaka's stuff, my history with this album, I got into Takanaka in a big way in the summer of 2023. I had received some not wonderful medical news. It wasn't anything totally life-altering or life-destroying, but it was the first time I kind of had a bit of a, oh, crap, kind of medical moment, and Takanaka's music really saw me through. However, this particular album was never one that I'd really reached for at the beginning. The album art for this one in particular wasn't really one that screamed, oh yeah, I want to throw that on. And the times that I did, going through the discography, it's a lot to soak in. in a couple of years. I mean, there's just so much stuff from Takanaka. Even when I listened to this album the first couple times, I probably thought less of this album than I do now. I thought it's kind of slow. It's a little, it's Takanaka is always good, but comparatively speaking, if all of his albums are vying for my attention at that time, this one definitely got shafted a little bit. It went into the back burner. Now, I've spent time with this album now, threw it on a good couple of times for the review specifically, had listened to it a good couple of times before the review started as well, the review cycle. And I can say this album has gone up in my estimations. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. There's a lot of gorgeous moments. Like I said, it's very relaxing. It's very moody. It's perfect to throw on in some instances. However, I still feel like this might not be an album I go back to quite as much as most of the albums we've talked about so far. And that's just my ears, that's my taste. I can totally see Alone being somebody's top Takanaka album, or in their top, whatever albums. But we'll get to the actual score in just a bit. We're going to do a little track by track. You can skip through this if you want to, but we're going to do a little bit of track by track here. All right, so we start off with track 1, Speed of Love. This is one of those disco tracks, more or less. This is one of my favorite on the album. That Speed of Love. Like, it's great. It's not overly long or anything. It's compact enough. Well, it's basically the perfect time, and just a great Takanaka track, kind of a mid-tempo disco track. Track 2, Feedback's Feel, may be my favorite on this album. Possibly. It's in contention with another track that I'll get to, but love Feedback's Feel. It's got this ripping guitar. It's a little bit more of a disco track again, but it's a little bit different than the first track. Obviously, it's got this different kind of guitar sound going on and everything. Track 3, Alone, the title track, is kind of it's got this lounge vibe. It's almost a ballad, but it's like a lounge ballad mix, maybe. I don't know. It's pretty good. It's not one of my favorite Takanaka tracks of all time so far, going through the albums chronologically, but this is on the upper end of the album technically still. We get to track 4, The Night Delay. This kind of hits a series of tracks that I would call the real relaxers, the real vibers, the real slower kind of songs, which is definitely going to be great for some of y'all. Not so much for me. There's gorgeous playing all over all of this album, obviously. This is Takanaka we're talking about. The instrumentation is always going to be fantastic. Yeah. So, The Night Delay, though, it's not one of my favorite Takanaka tracks so far. There's interesting moments and great playing and all that, of course. But it's 6 minutes. It's competing with other Takanaka to some degree in my mind. So for Takanaka, this is on the lower end for me, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. I'm going to tell it like it is to my ear anyway. We have track 5, She's Rain, and this kind of continues that trend. It's good. It's very gorgeous. Again, if this kind of Takanaka vibe is what majorly appeals to you, if you're kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you watch some of my previous reviews and went, you're crazy, I'm not quite as into the high energy Takanaka, I want the relaxing vibes, this stuff is going to be right up your alley. So yeah, She's Rain, not one of my favorites, again, unfortunately, but gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Rio no Yumi, I probably pronounced that wrong. That's fine though, whatever, we're moving on. This one's even longer. I think I remember this one having some pretty interesting keyboard solos and some, just beautiful playing again all around, but a little too long for me probably. And these past three tracks as well, I don't know. And again, maybe it's just I'm too new of a fan still, but they have not really stuck in my head even with the past couple of listens. I probably couldn't individually hum any of the melodies. Yeah, it's kind of the way it goes for those with my ear. But we get to track 7, Hey Ya, which does actually get back to great tracks for me. This one has almost a like American violin sort of folk thing going on with Takanaka's guitar playing. That's really interesting. I don't know if I'd want a whole album of Hey Ya sound, but it being here is interesting. I think that's cool. I really like this track as kind of a bizarre note in his discography in a good way. And Penguin Dancer is the track that might compete with Feedback's Feel for my favorite. I tend to love when Takanaka has more vocals, even though he is typically an instrumental artist. You can call that the pop music brainwashing or whatever you want to call it, but yeah, this one has kind of vocoded vocals, and it reminds me a little bit of some of the stuff we got on the Rainbow Goblins, but more fitting into this album's vibe than obviously the Rainbow Goblins. So, with all that being said, this is a good album. Let me quickly, before we get to the score, go over one or two more things that I thought of while doing the track by track. Number one, this album, again, kind of goes back to, I want to highlight two previous albums that I've kind of had this issue with, which is An Insatiable High and Jolly Jive. Both kind of had this, what I would consider lower production quality. I don't know if that's actually the production, if it's just the tones of the instruments used for the recording, what's going on with this, but I would also slot this into an album that I don't really like the way it just sounds quite as much as basically all the rest of his albums. And yeah, I am going to give it the out of 10 score. For me, I know for some of you it's going to be blasphemy, or you've never heard it, you're going to put it on and think I'm absolutely crazy for this score, but keep in mind, again, everything I've said about my preferences with Takanaka, maybe this will make sense to you then. This album gets, for me, to my ear, a 7 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more Takanaka reviews, discussions, all these kind of things in the future. Check out my community posts. I'm a big fan of community posts. We're doing polls. We're doing, quizzes. We're doing channel updates. All that good stuff. Thank you all so much for watching this review. Peace and love. I will see you all in the next one. Have a good one.